Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we have a gentleman by the name of Stevie Buckets.
That's an alias.
That is an alias.
Only occasionally, maybe the 5% time I'm good at basketball.
So this is his name is Steve, and he goes by Stevie Buckets because he's very good at basketball. And so we gave him a nickname. Anyways, first things first, thank you for tuning into this podcast. Thank you for watching on YouTube. And if in fact this is something that you feel could benefit somebody else, please share it with them, whether it's in the podcast form or the YouTube video. It doesn't matter. Just share it with them. And in the end, maybe they can reach out. They can always reach out to myself, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com. and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com, and we will get back to you and talk to you about your current situation and see if we can help. Ultimately, what we want to do is help everybody turn their mess into their message. You like that, Steve?
I do like that.
That's good.
There's a good ring to it.
All right. So in today's episode, what we want to discuss, let me just frame this and tell you that Steve is somebody that works here at Rock Recovery Center. And well, Steve, I'll let you describe what you do here, and then we'll go from there.
I guess my official title is clinical case manager. I run groups. I do a lot of life skill type things. I help with resumes. I help with job searches, general recovery things. I myself in recovery. I've been in recovery since March 29th of 2009 of continuous recovery.
Nights and weekends?
Nights and weekends too.
Wow.
And holidays.
All right.
Not.
Yeah, good.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
And so I've definitely seen a lot. I've had some wins. I've had some losses. And I think I have a general grasp on what it takes to be successful in recovery in various aspects.
So I thought that a good direction to go with this would be I don't want to say average age, I suppose, of people that enter into here at Rock Recovery Center and any other treatment center, really, for that matter. It's always going to be the younger population. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
What would you say the age frames is?
I mean, on average?
Yeah.
I mean, on average, it's probably, I'm going to say like 21 to 28.
So this is really going to be geared towards younger adults that are getting clean and sober. And what Steve and I wanted to do is take a little bit of time and discuss some of the things that we see with this younger population, men and women, that kind of some benchmarks that we look for with them in the treatment process, and also areas in which we see them lacking and what that can really show us on a clinical level. If they're not achieving these things in this area, it could lead to a relapse.
Absolutely.
So let's start off by saying or talking a little bit about when they enter into treatment for the first time in a life skills sense. You meet with them on an individual level, just you and said client. What are the things that you're looking for? What's that real first conversation look like?
I'm like, what are your goals? And usually it's a kind of a PHP level. And I'm like, what are your goals for the next 30 days? And then when it gets to the end of 30 days, I got, what's your goal for the next 30 days type of thing. But in terms of that first meeting, it's like, what are your goals? What do you want out of recovery? Do you know? Sometimes they don't know.
And do you get the standard, well, I want to be clean and sober?
Oh yeah, like all the time.
But that's a given.
That's a given. And I actually sometimes prefer when they're like honest, when they're like, I really don't know what I want,
So if somebody comes to you and you say, what do you want out of the next 30 days? And their response is, I don't really know. How do you handle that?
I say, well, I can offer some suggestions. What I know that looks like a successful program that leads to success more times than not. What I know what's worked for me. I know what it's worked for other men and women I've seen.
So in the first 30 days, it's safe to say that you're not really focusing too much on the life skills aspect of it as you are more of let's build more of a solid foundation of sobriety.
I will say it's probably 75% basic recovery, tools and 25% life skills. And by life skills, I mean we can get into that, but in terms of like hobbies, passions, stuff like that, just kind of, there's a lot of groups and everything in individual sessions. So there's not a lot of downtime, but I do still think it's important. At the end of the day, recovery is all about enjoying life. But I do think it's important. The most important thing is setting a good foundation for recovery. And to me, that looks like getting a sponsor, getting connected, fellowshipping, not isolating, being curious about recovery, reading the big book or basic text, whatever fellowship you're in, that type of thing.
So you give them more foundational tools really to kind of implement in that first 30 days.
Yeah.
And do you kind of keep track of with them if they're doing that?
Mm-hmm. I do. I ask them, do you have a sponsor? Okay. If you don't have a sponsor, have you gotten numbers? No? Okay. Is there anyone in the meetings that maybe you heard something, you're like, well, that was good, I relate to that, or that was something I want? And I don't mean necessarily material things, which that's not necessarily an awful thing, but more in terms of what they want in terms of more recovery, inner peace type stuff, So
you're wanting them really to find somebody that has more of a emotional, mental, spiritual, you want them to find somebody that they can align with more on that aspect, not so much like big muscles like me and nice car, stuff like that.
I mean, I ideally, and this is ideally, all that stuff, the balance of that is not bad. It would be a good thing. But if you hear, at the end of the day, the basic stuff like, oh, I feel like I could be honest with this person, or I could call this person and I could call this person on a consistent basis. That's freaking good. Let's start there,
Why do you think that's so important, though, for people to be able to feel comfortable with that person, whoever that person is?
There's going to be times where you're not going to be comfortable and you're going to have to make the tough phone call. It's just, I don't know if it's going to be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks of sobriety, but at some point, you're going to want to call when things get a little squirrely, where maybe you want to drink or you smelled weed at the park or something random. You never know what life's gonna hit you with, and you're going to want to call someone that you feel somewhat comfortable with. And you can build comfort. That's why a lot of sponsors, they say, call me this amount of time for a certain amount of time, just to get sort of the momentum going. And they do that so when something does come up, you're more willing to call. You're more in the habit of it. Because if your sponsor says, "Hey, call me tomorrow," and you don't call, and then you don't call the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and then you're actually in a tough bind, you're not going to make that call. Let's just be honest. I've been there. Like it makes it much harder to pick up the phone and reach out when you need to.
So let's recap that. The first 30 days and this is just from your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking really to see if they have a sponsor.
Yeah.
If they are actively going to meetings.
Yes.
If they are going to meetings, are they participating in the meeting? Or even before and after the meeting, are they kind of kicking it with people, having conversation with people? Or are they sitting at the picnic table off in the corner, smoking cigarettes and scrolling on their phone?
That's a really important point you just made. Like, even if you don't raise your hand and you're not sharing every meeting, you know what I'm saying? I think that's okay. Ideally you would do that. I think there's such a great benefit of that. But I think, they call it the meeting after the meeting, not the meeting ends and you're like beelining to your car in the parking lot to leave. You're not doing that. You're doing the meeting after the meeting, meaning the socialization, fellowshipping aspect. Some of the best stuff you hear is just, kind of chopping it up with the guys and girls outside. You know what I mean? That's a lot of times that's where the real honesty takes place. And then when someone invites you out to go to the diner afterwards, you saying yes rather than making up an excuse, saying, no, I got to go, when it's really just about you want to isolate, which I think a lot of times it is. That stuff that's the nitty gritty of stuff that keeps you sober.
What I heard you say is it's more community.
Yes, that's what it is. Because we're we're ideally we're making friends,
We're social creatures.
for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I say this all the time, and if you've been listening to this podcast for more than 5 minutes, well, let's say 5 days, you've heard me say time and time again that from my perspective, I think arguably the most important part of getting sober is the community, having people that you can rely on and that you trust. And I think that is something that doesn't just come by osmosis. Thank you, Steve. It's something that we have to put towards. We have to put some effort towards it, and if we don't, then it's not going to happen. And when you do run into those tough times, and you're left, if you're at the gas station and you walk up and you see the big cooler with frosted 16-ounce Budweisers in there,
yes,
you're gonna have a tough time saying no. But if you have a handful of people that you can rely on, and I could call Steve, hey man, just stay on the phone with me. I'm here at the gas station. I'm having a tough time right now. Steve is going to take that extra mile, or he's going to go that extra mile to stay on the phone with me and kind of talk me through that. And that's the cool thing about this whole sobriety thing, is because it's what we need. And a lot of this stuff, I don't want to go too far into this. A lot of this stuff is built within the first 30 days of somebody getting sober. We want somebody to be able to gravitate towards somebody or a group of people within the first 30 days.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get into, I know you said PHP, and for those of you listening or watching that don't know what PHP is, it's a level of care in the treatment process. It doesn't, let's just say could be day 1 to day 45 of sobriety inside of a treatment center. Let's move on to when they transition more into an intensive outpatient level of care, which is IOP. That is more where rubber meets the road a little bit. Okay, now you're done with the PHP component. You've completed that. You haven't had a job this whole entire time. Now you're transitioning into IOP. Talk a little bit about that. What you're looking for.
I like to call that transition to fight or flight moment. Are you going to fight?
Dig into that.
Are you going to fight for your recovery, or are you going to flee? Because this is when stuff gets real. It's a lot. It's I don't say easy, because don't get me wrong. If you're trying and you have even a couple of weeks clean, my hat goes off to you. I know it can be extremely hard, but you're in a controlled environment if you're at a facility. When you're transitioning now into more freedom, looking for a job, other aspects that I'll get into. It's when the stuff gets real, and a lot of times how you were doing the previous 30, 45 days is going to reflect on how fearful or prepared you are for the next chapter in that journey.
Go into more detail on that, because I think that's important. You just said this 30 days is going to reflect what you did in the past 30 days.
By that I mean, if you were taking suggestions, again, you don't have to be perfect. You know what I'm saying? If you got a sponsor, you're communicating somewhat consistently, you have a home group, a meeting you go to once a week or however many times it meets, and you do that, and you're making friends, you're kind of maybe looking for a job a little bit, you're on a job hunt. You're kind of more ready, rather than if you haven't been doing nothing and just sitting on your butt for 30 days and now you're at this next stage, you're going to be like, shoot, like I'm in a tough spot. And that's when picking up and using becomes an easy option.
Yeah, because I think the first 30 days, like we just said, we just spent 10 minutes on it about building that foundation. If you don't build that foundation, then you're destined to not fail, but it's going to be harder.
It's harder. You're just making life difficult for yourself.
Because when you had all that support from day 1 to 30, you didn't utilize it, but the expectations didn't change. You're still expected to go out, get a job, do these sorts of things, but you didn't utilize the support and the opportunity that you had in the first 30 days. So, but the expectation is still there that you have to still go out and do X, Y, and
Yes.
Z. All right. So when you're meeting with clients on an individual level and they're in an IOP level of care, let's just call it day 30 to day 60 of sobriety. What are some of the questions that you're asking them? What are you looking for? Stuff like that.
Okay, well, let's break it down to recovery. We'll go recovery first. Okay, recovery wise, okay, now you have a sponsor. Now you've been communicating. What step are you on? And this, to me, this is very an individual thing too, because I don't tell a sponsor how to sponsor anyone. You know what I mean? If they have their own method and it's working, that's fine. You know what I'm saying? So like, but ideally or generally, if you will, not ideally, generally, you're kind of working the steps now. What step are you on? You know, are you struggling with that? Are you procrastinating? This is kind of a life skill thing too. Don't approach step work like homework, you know, like it's not homework, it's medicine. And I think that's an important mindset shift, you know, because if we approach it like we did math homework, what do? We procrastinate it. We do it an hour before we met with our sponsor. You know what I mean? Like just, we don't treat it what it's really meant to be treated as. And then what was it then? I guess job wise, ideally, you know, we put a resume together. We set you up with Indeed or ZipRecruiter. We're looking for places. I would like you to work at somewhere you actually like, but you know, sometimes that's not realistic. So we go into the next best thing, you know? So then you're going to start working. And I think that's super important too, because it's routine. A lot, again, we talked about age group before. A lot of these young men and women, they've never had jobs before or very little work experience. And I think that's an important step to be more autonomous in your life, being more a part of your own rescue, if you will. You know, I think it gives you pride. I think you're from a well-rounded person.
Sense of accomplishment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I've seen people like what they thought was just going to be a part-time job. It ends up being a career, you know, because now through working with spiritual principles, being honest, working the steps, like they become one of the more reliable people at the job with a bunch of quote unquote normies who don't maybe not work a program, you know? So they become valuable assets. And it just, I think you open yourself up when you're working a program to a lot of different possibilities that you wouldn't be if, you know, you're not taking the necessary steps.
I oftentimes say that it's, we don't really comprehend the opportunities that we have ahead of us because we've been so used to being in this like cloud of just, it's just been awful. We're not used to having good things happen to us. We're not used to having opportunities presented to us. We're not used to having friends and family support us. And once we and it doesn't take long.
No, it really doesn't.
45, 50, 60 days of continuous sobriety, doing all the right things and taking all the suggestions, opportunity just starts coming left and right. And I can think of a few clients that are currently in our program now that I know for 99.9% chance guarantee that they are going to go very far in their sobriety, not only in a sobriety sense, but financially, career-wise, so on and so forth, because the mindset that they've been in and the extra mile that they have gone in just a short period of time that they've been here.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important to understand, is that this is why when somebody says, I'm going to do my 30 days and, I'm going to transition back home. Well, let me ask you, Steve, what are your thoughts and opinions on that? Like when somebody comes to you and you meet with them for the first time, say they've been here 3 or 4 days and they say, well, I appreciate it, Steve, but I'm actually going back home at 30 days. What's your approach then?
Well, my approach is I don't want to like hammer them with that's an awful idea, even though it usually is. At that moment, I just say just try to be open-minded, and we'll touch on that subject later, and maybe a couple weeks from now I'll see where they're at with that. The problem with going home is, and I'm literally, we talk about it all the time, but I'm trying to rack my brain and remember people who've actually did the whole 30 days, went back home, and it like worked out, like long term. And I can't really think of a lot, especially if not working in a program. Like if you're not going to do it here, you're not going to do it there. If you didn't do all the stuff we talked about, how to build that solid foundation in the first 30, 45 days, you're just not going to do it at home. And if you think you are, I think you're kidding yourself, not to be like super blunt about it, but that's just what happens.
Well, I mean, you are being super blunt about it, Steve, but that's what we do here. Real recovery talk.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Now, as far as school and like volunteer opportunities, do you get involved with that stuff at all?
I do as well. I recently walked a young lady through her GED process, which I think is very important to schooling. That's one of the things I did, and I think it was like 4 or 5 months clean. I went back to the community college we have down here, and that was a big step for me because it was like my schooling before was, because of my addiction, I didn't take very seriously, and self-esteem issues and all this stuff we build through. Acts, esteemable acts and working and therapy and all that stuff. I was ready for it then, but like at this point, you've done all the previous things to the best of your ability. You might now be ready for school, and I think that's a great way to kind of discover maybe what you want to do in life too. I recommend taking, different classes and stuff like that. If you absolutely have no idea what you want to do, if you have an idea what you want to do, maybe it's different, but if you don't, I think taking different types of classes could be a big benefit.
You touched earlier on like hobbies and stuff like that. I want you to talk a little bit about that and why you think it's so important for somebody to have hobbies or points of interest when getting sober.
Well, I think it's important because it makes, look, at the end of the day, everyone from addict, alcoholic, someone who's never picked up a drug in their life or a drink, we want the same thing, and that's having a decent, productive, fun, fulfilling life. That's like what just humans want, And I think recovery is such a great way to have that. It has been like that in my life, and a lot of my friends in recovery, that's been the case for them as well. And I think even when you're in the process, you see the light at the end of the tunnel. If you speak, so to speak, of a skill or a passion, you're getting good at. I think that's one more thing, one more barrier in terms of picking up. It makes it that much harder to pick up a drug or a drink if you're actually enjoying life.
So what are some of and I love what you said there. It makes total sense. And again, I reference this all the time. I think it's important to have passions and hobbies. And I often talk about this podcast and the YouTube and the video stuff. Like this wasn't something that was even on my radar 5 years ago. I didn't even know how to turn on a camera, let alone do a podcast. And, and I can accredit a lot of my knowledge and skills now to surrounding myself with, good people that kind of showed me how to get started. But what it did for me primarily was gave me more of a sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important for people to understand. Sobriety, and I say it all the time, stale sobriety isn't worth having.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Nobody wants that old piece of crusty bread in the pantry. We're going to just throw it out, and I think a lot of times people can fall into that trap of, I'm sober, but my life sucks. And that's not sustainable.
It's not. And what's the point of being clean and if you're not enjoying your life?
Yeah.
What's the point?
So what are some of let me just ask you, what are some of the things that like maybe you found out that you enjoyed after sobriety that you didn't so much know that you enjoyed prior sobriety?
Well, personally, my first year in recovery was amazing. And I credit that to finding my passions, which was one of them was I remember I always liked reading and writing when I was a kid, but through active addiction, like I lost all that. All I like to do was, get high and everything like that goes along with it. In early recovery, I kind of discovered reading again. I discovered writing again, and it became like a mission. Like I wrote a lot, and it was fun having an imagination again, and I wanted to get something published, and just it was great being creative. And I realized that, oh, maybe this could be a goal of mine to do that. And I had no illusions that if I ever picked up again, I'd be successful in that aspect, and that really was kind of a watershed moment for me personally, because it meant I had something worth more than getting high, than that next fix type of thing, So I put that, in front of the importance of using and the importance of getting numb. And it's that in itself has been a really powerful thing in my life, as creativity and writing in different aspects.
Do you find yourself at times when you are struggling, and you're how many years sober?
13.
13 years clean and sober. I mean, you have tough times.
Absolutely.
Do you find that your creativity and your writing and stuff like that, and putting pen to paper, or maybe finger to keyboard, helps you?
I do believe it does when I apply it, because my go-to, even without the drugs, is isolation, procrastination, distraction, whether it's video games or Netflix or something, you know what I mean? But when I am in a bind and I put it in a productive manner, it's distracting in a good way. It's channeled, if you will, and it's just that's a talk about life skills. It's just a healthy way to deal with, when life comes at you. My favorite quote of all times, when Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, and that's what it's all about. Like, life's going to happen to you. How do you respond to it? And if you're not working anything, if you haven't done anything in the first 30, 45 days, if you haven't done anything in the 60 to 90 days, life's going to happen to you. And how are you going to respond? Now working a program for 13 years, to varying degrees, in 13 years, there's been times my recovery has been better than others, but when it's, I'm on point, I'm doing really healthy things, and I'm more proactive rather than reactive to life.
Would you say you're on point now?
I would say, yeah, I'm on point now.
I think you're on point.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Anything that you feel like we didn't touch on that you would like to?
I was going to say just the complacency aspect of it. Like, life's not going to happen to you. The little elves aren't going to come in the middle of the night and do, your step work for you, or all that stuff. It's the only way it's going to get done is if you actually do it. And once you kind of crack that code and figure out a schedule for your for yourself, that serves your personal needs. I think that opens up a lot of things, and I just think just being proactive in recovery and in life is such a great thing.
It's very important.
Yes.
Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome.
Again, thank you for tuning in. In the end, if somebody can benefit from this, please send it to them. And you can find us on Google Play Music, I believe, yes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, any of your favorite podcast players. You'd be able to find this podcast and, share it with them and do whatever, copy the link and send it to them in a text message. You can also find us on Facebook at Real Recovery Talk. And in the end, like I said before, if you want to reach out to myself or Ben, you could always email us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And maybe this episode you heard something from Steve that makes sense and resonates with you. Reach out to us if you want to be in contact with this guy. I might be able to make that happen. But in the end, what we want to do is help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.